In the seemingly perfect neighborhood of Willow Creek, everything appeared calm. Immaculate lawns, spotless streets, and homes that looked straight out of a magazine. It was the kind of place where the HOA president, Karen Mitchell, prided herself on making sure every rule was followed to the letter. But when Karen decided to target my daughter, who wears leg braces and struggles with every step, she crossed a line that would change everything. You see, Karen didn't know who she was messing with. When she dragged my disabled daughter off the school bus, her unprovoked cruelty ignited something in me that Karen could never have predicted. I'm not just any parent standing up for my child. I'm the state attorney general, and I don't take injustice lightly. The moment I saw Karen lay her hands on my daughter, something snapped inside me. She thought she could intimidate my child and get away with it. She thought she could push us around because of her position in the HOA, but she was wrong. The truth was, Karen didn't just pick on the wrong family. She picked a fight with someone who had the power to make things right. This is the story of how one woman's blind arrogance and unprovoked attack on my daughter didn't just go unnoticed. It set off a chain of events that left her with nowhere to hide. Karen Mitchell's mistake was not realizing that when you mess with the wrong person, the consequences can be far greater than you ever expected. What happened next was something Karen never saw coming, and it all started with her cruel act against my daughter. We had just moved to Willow Creek, a neighborhood that seemed like the perfect place to start fresh, away from the hustle and bustle of city life. It was one of those places you'd imagine when you think of a suburban utopia, quiet streets lined with pristine houses, well-maintained lawns, and the kind of community where everyone knew everyone. There was a sense of tranquility here, a place where you could feel safe, where the children played outside and neighbors waved to each other as they went about their day. It was the kind of environment I envisioned for my daughter, Emily. Emily was only 9 years old, but her life had already been full of challenges. Born with a condition that left her unable to walk without leg braces, she had faced more adversity than any child should. Yet despite it all, her spirit was unbreakable. She had this light about her, a smile that could brighten the darkest days. She didn't let her disability define her, and I made it my mission to ensure she had a childhood that was as full of joy, love, and normalcy as possible. Willow Creek, with its peaceful charm and family-friendly atmosphere, seemed like the perfect place to give Emily the life she deserved. We had just settled into our new home at the end of the block. It was a cozy house with a large front yard, a place where Emily could roll her wheelchair freely and watch the world around her. The neighbors seemed welcoming at first. A few introduced themselves with kind smiles, offering us cookies and words of encouragement. I thought we had found the sanctuary we were looking for, away from the chaos of our past. But what we didn't realize was that not everyone in Willow Creek shared the same vision of harmony. Karen Mitchell, the president of the Willow Creek Homeowners Association, HOA, had a different idea of what made a neighborhood perfect. To her, everything had to be in line. Each lawn perfectly manicured, every fence painted the right shade, every mailbox standing at attention. She was the self-appointed gatekeeper of order, and her obsession with control seemed endless. Karen prided herself on making sure everyone followed the rules, and to her, anyone who didn't fit her rigid idea of how things should be was an outsider. From the moment we moved in, I sensed Karen's disapproval. She didn't approach us with a warm welcome or even a simple hello like the others had. Instead, she watched from her front window as we unloaded the moving truck, her eyes narrowing at the sight of Emily's wheelchair ramp, which I had built to make her life a little easier. The ramp wasn't extravagant. It was simply a necessary feature to help Emily get in and out of the house. But to Karen, it was an eyesore, an imperfection that didn't belong in her pristine neighborhood. That day, she didn't speak to us directly, but I could feel her judgment in every glance she cast our way. Over the following days, Karen's presence in our lives became more prominent, and not in a friendly way. She'd show up uninvited to inspect the house, always finding something to complain about. The color of the flower pots on our porch was wrong. The way we had placed our lawn chairs wasn't up to standard. It was small, insignificant stuff. But to Karen, these minor infractions were unacceptable. At first, I tried to brush it off, assuming she was just being overzealous. But soon, it became clear that her obsession with control wasn't just limited to the rules of the neighborhood. It was personal. One afternoon, as I was finishing up some work in the garage, I saw Karen across the street, walking towards me, with that clipboard of hers. She had a way of approaching people like she was inspecting their every move, ready to find fault in anything she could. "I've noticed something," she said, her voice sharp and clipped. "Your daughter's therapy equipment is cluttering up the garage. That's not how we maintain a good image here in Willow Creek." I was taken aback. Emily's therapy equipment was vital for her well-being, braces, mats, small weights, yet Karen saw it as something that tarnished the neighborhood's perfection. I tried to stay calm. "It's for Emily's health," I explained, my voice steady. "She needs it to function every day." But Karen wasn't listening. She scribbled something down on her clipboard, nodding as if I hadn't said anything at all. "Just make sure it's cleaned up. We don't want to send the wrong message to the neighbors," she replied dismissively before walking away. I was left standing there, staring after her, a feeling of frustration beginning to simmer inside me. How could anyone be so obsessed with the appearance of things that they couldn't see the real people behind them? This wasn't just about rules. It was about control. Karen didn't care that Emily's health depended on her equipment. To her, it was just one more thing that didn't fit into her perfect image of Willow Creek. But what really hurt was how this was affecting Emily. She didn't understand why someone would be so mean to her for something she couldn't help. After one of Karen's complaints, Emily had asked me, "Why does she hate me, Daddy?" Her small voice, filled with confusion, broke my heart. I tried to reassure her that not everyone was like Karen, but deep down, I knew that things were getting worse, not better. Karen wasn't just targeting us because we were different. She was going out of her way to make us feel unwanted, as though we didn't belong. The isolation in Willow Creek was starting to set in. While the other neighbors kept their distance, afraid of Karen's wrath, Emily and I grew closer, finding comfort in each other as we faced the subtle, constant pressure of living under Karen's watchful eye. We had hoped that moving to Willow Creek would provide us with the peace we longed for. Instead, we found ourselves in the middle of a battle that we never expected. A battle not just for our home, but for the right to exist peacefully in a place that was supposed to be our refuge. At first, the complaints seemed like small things, insignificant in the grand scheme of things, yet each one felt like a sharp jab to my patience. Karen Mitchell, the self-appointed queen of Willow Creek's Homeowners Association, HOA, had a meticulous eye for detail, or perhaps it was more accurate to say she had a relentless need to control everything around her. She first noticed the flower pot on our porch, the one that had been a gift from Emily's grandmother. It wasn't placed precisely in the approved spot according to the HOA's unwritten rules, a harmless decoration, yet Karen, with her ever-watchful eyes, saw it as a violation. She left us a note, the kind that seemed polite on the surface but was laced with passive-aggressive undertones. "Please ensure all items on your porch are in compliance with Willow Creek standards. Thank you for your cooperation." That was how she started. The next complaint came shortly after about the color of our mailbox. It wasn't white enough, it wasn't neat enough, and it certainly wasn't as perfect as the others in the neighborhood. I thought it was ridiculous, but Karen didn't. She sent another note, this time a little sharper, a little more insistent. And when I didn't immediately act on her requests, she started taking it upon herself to monitor us, showing up uninvited to inspect things. At first, I didn't take it too seriously. I tried to brush off the notes, ignore the whispered conversations behind closed curtains, and assume that it was just part of the routine in a neighborhood so obsessed with perfection. But Karen wasn't the type to let things slide. Every small infraction became a point of contention, and I began to feel the weight of her surveillance over our every move. It felt as though we were constantly under a microscope, as if our every decision, our every action, was being scrutinized and judged. I tried to remain calm, to avoid making a scene. After all, what did it really matter if our mailbox was a little off color? Or if the flower pot wasn't in exactly the right spot? I could fix those things, move them around, make Karen happy for a while. But it wasn't enough. The deeper issue, the real problem, began when Karen turned her attention to Emily. Emily had always been strong, both physically and mentally, despite the challenges she faced. Born with a condition that required her to wear leg braces, she had always needed extra care and consideration. She didn't let that stop her, though. She was a vibrant, joyful little girl, always ready with a smile, always eager to engage with the world despite her limitations. But that's exactly what bothered Karen. Karen couldn't stand anything that didn't fit her idea of normal, and Emily's leg braces, her wheelchair, her very presence, were a glaring sign of imperfection in Karen's eyes. It wasn't long before the subtle complaints turned into direct criticisms. Karen's attention shifted away from the garden and the mailbox and onto our daughter. It started when Emily, in her excitement to meet some of the other kids, rolled her wheelchair down the sidewalk. Karen was watching from her front window, as she often did, and it didn't take long before she marched across the street to confront me. "Your daughter's wheelchair is damaging the sidewalk," she said, her tone sharp and unyielding. "It's leaving marks on the pavement. That's a violation of HOA rules." I was stunned. Marks on the sidewalk? For a child in a wheelchair? Emily, who had to struggle to walk, to even move around, was being accused of damaging property for simply living her life. I couldn't believe it. I tried to reason with Karen. "It's just the marks from her wheelchair," I explained calmly, my frustration beginning to simmer beneath the surface. "It's not a big deal. She needs to be able to get around, and it's part of her life. She can't help it." But Karen wasn't listening. She had already decided that those marks, those faint traces of Emily's movement, were an eyesore, another violation to add to her growing list of infractions. I didn't want to escalate things, so I moved quickly, promising to clean up the sidewalk, even though I knew it was ridiculous. But Karen didn't stop there. Every time Emily did anything that stood out, whether it was parking her wheelchair a little too far onto the grass or taking too long to get inside the house, Karen was there, watching, judging, and finding a new way to make our lives harder. It didn't end with sidewalk marks. Next, it was the therapy equipment. Emily, as part of her physical therapy, had a few items in the garage: exercise mats, small weights, a balance ball. Things that helped her improve her strength, things that were necessary for her well-being. But to Karen, it was clutter. I remember the day she came over, clipboard in hand, and pointed at the small collection of therapy items we kept in the corner of the garage. "This is not acceptable," she told me, her voice dripping with disdain. "It's unsightly. It's ruining the aesthetic of the neighborhood." I was beyond frustrated at this point. I tried to explain that it was essential for Emily's health, that we had no choice but to keep the equipment close, but Karen wasn't having it. "This is not how we do things here," she snapped before scribbling something down on her clipboard and walking off. I tried to stay calm. I didn't want to make waves in the neighborhood. I paid the fines Karen sent, fixed the things she complained about, and hoped that things would quiet down. But each time I complied, it felt like I was giving her more power over us, more control. The subtle pressure started to build, the feeling that I couldn't do anything without Karen looking over my shoulder. I started to resent the way she watched us, the way she seemed to enjoy finding fault in everything we did. The more she imposed her will on us, the more I felt like we didn't belong in Willow Creek, a place I had thought would be our sanctuary. But the true breaking point came when Karen crossed the line from mere annoyance to something far more dangerous. It wasn't about flower pots or mailboxes anymore, it was about Emily. Karen didn't just want to control our yard, she wanted to control our lives, and that meant controlling Emily. It wasn't enough to pick on the little things anymore. Now Karen was going after Emily herself. And that's when I knew that no matter what, I had to stand up and fight. There was no way I was going to let someone like Karen hurt my daughter. Not now, not ever. It started with little things, tiny, insignificant complaints that I tried my best to brush off. But as the weeks passed, Karen's behavior became more and more intolerable. It wasn't just the flower pots or the color of the mailbox anymore. Those were just the tip of the iceberg. As time went on, it became clear that Karen wasn't just an obsessive HOA president enforcing neighborhood rules. She was something much worse, someone who wanted to tear us down, to break our spirit. And it didn't stop with the small things anymore. Karen had set her sights on Emily. At first, it was just the wheelchair ramp. She criticized it, called it an eyesore, and demanded we take it down or replace it. I explained time and time again that it was for Emily's safety, that she needed it to be able to get in and out of the house. But Karen wasn't interested in hearing my explanations. She didn't care about Emily's condition or the struggle she faced every day just to get by. No, for Karen, everything had to look perfect, and Emily's ramp wasn't a part of that vision. I paid the fines and moved the ramp as best as I could, but Karen was relentless. She always found something new to complain about. It was as though nothing was ever enough to satisfy her. Then it escalated. Slowly but surely, Karen started attacking the very things that made Emily who she was, her therapy equipment, her wheelchair, and her very presence. Emily had always been a brave girl, determined not to let her disability define her. She pushed herself to be as independent as possible, despite the limitations her leg braces imposed on her. But to Karen, this was nothing more than an inconvenience, something that didn't fit into her neat and orderly view of the world. It started when Emily was out in the yard, sitting in her wheelchair and watching the kids play down the street. She loved to watch them run and jump, even if she couldn't join in. One afternoon, Emily sat in her chair, enjoying the sunshine, her favorite purple blanket wrapped around her for comfort. She hummed softly to herself as she watched the world go by. It was a simple, peaceful moment, one that every child deserved to have, but Karen, once again, wasn't happy. "Keep that noise down," Karen had shouted from across the street, her voice sharp and abrasive. "This is a quiet neighborhood." Emily stopped humming immediately, her face confused and a little hurt. She had no idea why Karen was upset. She wasn't being loud, she wasn't bothering anyone. But to Karen, even the smallest noise seemed like a violation. She couldn't stand the sight of Emily, couldn't stand that Emily was different. And this, her humming, was just one more thing that pushed Karen's buttons. I rushed outside to intervene, but before I could reach them, Karen had already marched away, muttering under her breath. Emily's smile faded, and she quietly rolled back into the house, the weight of Karen's cruelty pressing down on her like a heavy stone. The complaints didn't stop there. Karen's next target was the therapy equipment that Emily used to improve her strength. Emily needed braces, a balance ball, and small weights to help her with physical therapy exercises. These were essential tools that had been prescribed by her doctor. But to Karen, they were just clutter. One afternoon I was in the garage, putting away some things, when I noticed Karen standing by the open door, her eyes scanning the equipment like an inspector searching for violations. "This stuff is ruining the neighborhood's look," she had said with a sneer. "It's clutter, and it's not the image we want to project in Willow Creek." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "This is for Emily," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "This is part of her therapy. She needs it." But Karen wasn't listening. She didn't care about Emily's health or well-being. She only cared about her version of perfection. She jotted something down on her clipboard, nodded in approval, and turned to leave. I stood there, stunned, as Karen walked away, her actions, now crossing into something far more sinister. Then came the day it all came to a head. The day that changed everything. Emily was getting off the school bus, as she always did, excited to tell me about her day. She had struggled all day with her leg braces, but nothing could stop her from walking to me with that infectious smile on her face. As the bus came to a stop, I saw Karen standing by the bus stop, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. My heart dropped into my stomach as I watched her approach Emily. What happened next was something I could never have anticipated. Karen marched up to Emily, her face contorted with fury. Without a word of warning, she grabbed Emily's arm, roughly, aggressively, and yanked her away from the bus door. "This is not how we do things here!" Karen shouted, her voice shrill. Emily stumbled, struggling to maintain her balance as Karen dragged her across the driveway. My blood ran cold. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. Karen, this woman, who had already made life unbearable for us, was now physically dragging my daughter, who could barely stand on her own, by the arm. I watched in disbelief as Emily tried to pull away, but Karen's grip was too tight. I could see the fear in Emily's eyes, and it broke something inside me. This wasn't just a neighbor causing trouble anymore. This was abuse, and I wasn't going to let it happen. I sprinted down the driveway, my heart racing as I tried to reach them. "Stop!" I yelled, my voice hoarse with fury. But I wasn't fast enough. By the time I reached them, Karen had already pulled Emily halfway down the driveway, her legs shaking as she tried to keep her balance. Emily was gasping, trying to free herself from Karen's grasp, but Karen wasn't letting go. She was too consumed by her own anger and control to care about Emily's pain. I could feel the heat rising in my chest as I reached out and grabbed Karen's arm, pulling her away from my daughter. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" I shouted, my voice trembling with anger. But Karen just stared at me, her face pale with a mixture of defiance and shock. She had crossed a line, and now she was going to face the consequences. It was then that I realized something. I wasn't just a father trying to protect his daughter. I wasn't just a victim of Karen's obsession with control. I was the state attorney general, and I wasn't going to let this go. I wasn't going to let anyone hurt my family, least of all someone like Karen Mitchell. The entire neighborhood had stopped to watch the scene unfold, but Karen had no idea who she was messing with. She had no idea that I wasn't just any parent. I had the power to make sure she was held accountable for what she had done. And from that moment on, I knew things were going to change. Karen had finally pushed me too far. She had crossed a line that I couldn't let her come back from. Now, it was time to make sure she paid for it. I reached the scene just as Karen was pulling Emily away, and that's when everything in me snapped. The anger, the frustration, the helplessness I had been holding back for so long. It all boiled over in that one moment. I saw my daughter's face, pale, terrified, struggling against Karen's tight grip, and I knew I couldn't stay calm any longer. Karen had crossed a line I never thought anyone would dare cross. She had tried to physically drag my daughter, to manhandle her in a way that was not only cruel, but unforgivable. My legs moved before my mind could catch up, and I was there in an instant. I walked up to Karen, steady and composed, though my heart was pounding in my chest. I didn't scream. I didn't raise my voice. I simply stood there, my gaze fixed on her as I pulled out my badge, the cold metal gleaming in the afternoon sun. "I'm the state attorney general," I said, my voice calm, but there was a weight in every word. Karen froze, her hands still gripping Emily's arm, but now her face had gone completely pale. She looked at me like she was seeing a ghost. her mouth opening and closing but no words coming out. The smugness that had been present in her every move, every condescending glance, every judgmental comment, disappeared in an instant. She had no idea who she was messing with. I could see the shock in her eyes as the realization of who I was hit her. She stammered, her mouth moving, but no coherent words formed. I wasn't interested in her excuses or apologies. What she had done was inexcusable. "You don't get to treat my daughter like that," I said again, this time with more force. My hands were steady, my voice unwavering. Every ounce of authority I had accumulated in my career, every ounce of the power that came with being the State Attorney General was channeled into that moment. Karen had no idea how far I was willing to go to protect my family. The people around us, our neighbors, the parents watching, the kids who had gathered in the vicinity, had been silent, unsure of how to react. But as I stood there, looking Karen in the eye, I could see their faces shift. They weren't just witnessing an argument between neighbors. They were witnessing something far bigger. They were witnessing justice about to be served. Karen finally let go of Emily, her grip loosening as her confidence faltered, replaced by the cold realization that she had made a dangerous mistake. I immediately stepped forward, kneeling to check on Emily, ensuring she was okay. She looked at me, her eyes wide and full of fear, but also a glimmer of relief. Her arms were still trembling from the shock, but she was safe now. I turned back to Karen, who had taken a few hesitant steps backward, trying to regain some sense of control. "This is over," I told her firmly. "What you've done today will not go unpunished. I'm calling the police." She took another step back, her face a mixture of anger and fear, but there was nothing she could do now. The law wasn't on her side anymore. As I pulled out my phone and dialed the authorities, I felt the weight of everything finally start to lift. The frustration of the past few weeks, the constant pressure of Karen's cruelty, the toll it had taken on Emily, all of it was being replaced by something else. Power, control, justice. The moment I had been holding back for so long had finally come. Karen tried to speak, her voice shaky as she muttered, "This is ridiculous. This is an overreaction." But I didn't let her words reach me. She had already gone too far. She wasn't just a neighbor causing a nuisance anymore. She was a criminal who had physically harmed my daughter. "You've assaulted my child," I said, my words cutting through the air with finality. "And now you will face the consequences." The sirens could be heard in the distance as I stood tall, watching as the neighborhood that had been under Karen's oppressive grip slowly began to stir. Neighbors who had kept their distance from us for so long started murmuring, some of them, nodding their heads in approval. They knew Karen was a problem, but they had been too afraid to speak out. Now it was clear. Someone was finally taking action. When the police arrived, they took Karen into custody without any resistance. Her face was a picture of disbelief, as though she couldn't comprehend what had just happened. She had thought she could bully me, manipulate me, make me bow to her version of perfect. But today, she had learned that there were consequences for crossing the line. The consequences weren't just some HOA fines or angry letters. They were far more serious, and Karen was about to find out just how serious they could get. As the police escorted her away, I stood with Emily by my side, holding her close, making sure she knew she was safe. The fight wasn't over, but this was the turning point. The moment when I revealed my true power, when I showed Karen that no one, no matter how much authority they thought they had, could ever hurt my family again. As the police arrived and took Karen into custody, the weight of what had just transpired began to sink in. The adrenaline that had surged through me earlier started to fade, leaving behind a quiet sense of relief. The tension that had built up over the weeks, the constant anxiety of living under Karen's watchful eye, seemed to dissipate in that single moment. Karen, who had once been the undisputed authority in Willow Creek, was now nothing more than a criminal being led away in handcuffs. As the officers escorted her down the street, the crowd that had gathered began to murmur among themselves. Some neighbors stood in stunned silence, others exchanged knowing glances, and a few even nodded in approval. It was clear that Karen's reign of terror had come to an end, and there was a palpable sense of freedom in the air. Emily, who had been so shaken moments before, now stood by my side, her body still trembling, but her eyes bright with something new, hope. I bent down and hugged her tightly, whispering reassurances that she was safe now, that this nightmare was over. For the first time in a long while, I felt the weight of the world lift off my shoulders. Karen's arrest was just the beginning of our recovery. But it was a huge step toward reclaiming our peace. The days of living in fear of her petty complaints, the anxiety that came with each knock on the door, were behind us. Willow Creek, once again, had a chance to return to the calm, welcoming place it had always promised to be. And for the first time in months, I could breathe easy, knowing that my daughter was safe and that justice had finally been served. Karen's actions were unforgivable, but in the end, justice was served. She may have thought she could intimidate us, push us around, and make us feel powerless, but she underestimated the strength of a father protecting his daughter. What happened today was a victory not just for us, but for everyone who's ever felt powerless against cruelty and injustice. No one has the right to treat others the way Karen treated Emily. This is a reminder that no matter who you are or what power you think you have, if you mess with the wrong person, there are consequences. If this story moved you, if you believe in standing up for what's right, share this video and let's make sure no one like Karen can get away with cruelty. Again, let's show the world that when people fight for justice, change is possible. If you want more real stories about justice, courage, and the fight against those who abuse their power, subscribe to the HOA Stories. Join the conversation, and let's stand together for what's right. This is only the beginning. Let's keep pushing for fairness, for kindness, and for a world where everyone can live free from fear.